Thanks everyone for being with us this morning. This is Debbie Brown with Colorado Business Roundtable, and I want to thank you for joining us. We've put together this webinar as kind of a part two. We were joined by Sandra and Chris pre-election to talk about some of the biggest issues on the ballot and on the horizon for the business community here in Colorado in terms of what's going to affect the business climate, what will affect perhaps our economic recovery coming out of COVID. And we put this together again as what happened during the election, with the election complete, with a lot of the political dynamics set, looking forward into 2023. We're going to tune back in for a conversation about how the political climate might be impacting the business community in 2023 and beyond. So thanks everyone for joining us today. To kick us off, we're having two different presentations today. To kick us off, I want to first introduce you to Sandra Solon, who was with us for the previous briefing. Also Chris Brown with Common Sense Institute, who also weighed in. And I'm excited today to also welcome Senator Carrie Donovan to the conversation to also provide a little bit of a recap for us and a look forward. So to give us a little bit of a framing, many of you are familiar with Colorado Business Roundtable. If you're not, want to just set the stage that we are an organization that's a coalition of employers from academia, business, community, and government that are all aligned around the fact that business is a force for good in our community. So we care about these issues, about business issues and economic issues, not because we're fighting for brick and mortar, but because we know that a lot of these employers do that. They employ people here in Colorado, and livelihoods are affected in terms of how we look at our state going forward. So that's a little bit of the lens for today. And want to turn it over to our first batch of presenters. And then after that, we're going to be talking to Forward Denver about what they're looking into in terms of Denver and how the Denver mayoral elections, Denver City Council elections definitely affect the business climate in Denver, which affects all of us as well. So that's a little bit of the two-pronged approach for today. We're going to take questions after each section. So if you've got questions, we will have an ability for you to put that in the chat, and we'll be definitely looking at those as well. So with that, I want to go ahead and turn it over to Sandra Solon, who's going to be in kind of the moderating role for the first part of our conversation. So Sandra, take it away.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Debbie. It is lovely to see everyone this morning, and I'm thrilled to have an opportunity to visit about the 2022 election. What happened, we'll talk about that briefly. I think most of us read the newspapers about some of the dynamics, but maybe you may or not be aware of some of the details with respect to the ballot questions. And then mostly talk about what it means for business. What does the landscape present for the engagement of the business community in this legislative session and in the executive agencies as well. So thrilled to be joined, to be here, and then to be joined by Chris Brown, who you're all familiar with in our prior conversations and in previous engagement with COBRT. And he's with Common Sense Institute, as Debbie mentioned. And then new to the conversation and new to COBRT's panels, if you will, is Senator Carrie Donovan. Senator Donovan is leaving come January. She'll be a former senator. However, she has had a distinguished career at the state legislature. She currently serves as the president pro tem in the Senate and serves the communities in the mountain area, Eagle County, Pitkin, Gilpin, and a host of others, a fairly large district. So she brings a unique sort of Western Slope perspective to the legislature as a Democrat, as a member of leadership there, and also serves as the chair of the Senate Agriculture Committee as a rancher herself. So just thrilled to have her join us today. She and I are working on some projects together, and she and her husband, Shad Marib, have formed an organization or an entity and firm called Ulysses Strategy. So you'll see their name referenced here. So I'm again thrilled to have her join this conversation and share her perspective on what we might see upcoming in the next legislative session, how the political landscape affects all of us. I'm going to pop up a PowerPoint presentation to help guide the conversation, and as Debbie noted, we will have some Q&A at the end, but in the meantime, Senator Chris and Senator Donovan and I will have a conversation about the election. So let's see here. After all these years, or after all these years, literally, I think I'd be a little bit better at all of this, but let's see here. Okay, so again, we're just thrilled to join you in this recap and a look ahead. We will talk about the 22 election outcome. We'll spend just a little bit of time there, talk about the ballot questions, and then the candidates, the candidate outcome, and where the legislature sits. And what then that political and policy landscape looks like, and then what that landscape means for business, as we mentioned earlier. We're going to start on the ballot questions, and I think what was particularly intriguing with the ballot, the outcome of the ballot questions this year is, as I noted, sort of a split personality, some real thoughtful voters this cycle and where they wanted to see the state headed on a policy side in the questions that were before them. As we discussed in our October briefing, there were a lot of different issues. CSI did some great work analyzing the economic implications of some of these items. And so I'm going to ask Chris to jump into an overview of the outcome of these, the election related to the ballot questions. So Chris, I'll pass it on over to you.
Great, thanks, Sandra. Yeah, I found that point interesting about a split personality. What I find interesting when we look at the measures that we analyzed and what ultimately passed, we have one tax cut, one tax increase with a substantial new spending program, and one, I'll say, sort of budgeting decision that the voters have made around allocating $300 million of existing revenue towards affordable housing. So really across the board, when you look at some of these fiscal and budgeting questions as well. And just a quick recap, Proposition 123 was that question before voters of whether or not to dedicate approximately $300 million or 0.1% of existing federal taxable income towards affordable housing. And there, given that passed, there is now going to be both a process of passing that through legislation to be in statute, and there'll be a regulatory process to define some of the elements. And then beyond that, there will be a question of whether or not different municipalities across the state opt in to the program to receive those funds, to leverage them in sort of the intent of the program. So there's a lot of moving parts and still a lot to be written on this one, but nonetheless, it seems that it was a clear priority from voters. Proposition 121 was again the second time voters both saw and then approved a small reduction, or in this case, a 0.15% reduction in state income tax, about 3% of the personal income tax, estimated about $400 million reduction in the long run. So the interesting thing between these two elements that I wonder if we may get into a discussion on is that there's pretty significant implications for the state budget as it relates to these two measures. Specifically, if the legislature now has to prioritize $300 million towards affordable housing and has a $400 million reduction in income tax, at least, especially in the first year, given this is when the change will occur, has a pretty significant impact. The state budget and legislative council that does the revenue forecast will put out their updated forecast in, I think, about 2 weeks. I think it's on the 20th, 2 weeks or so. And we'll see what their estimates are for the projections for both income tax, the interactions with Tabor, what the budgeting implications may be as well. And then the third one, Proposition FF, is a tax increase on higher income earners, those making more than $300,000 a year. It's approximate about an average $900 tax increase for those that will be impacted to fund the meals at K-12 for students and K-12 students that are not currently eligible through free and reduced lunch, but to have healthy meals provided again during school. So some pretty significant measures passed by voters at different margins, but will be part of the landscape here for Coloradans going forward.
Yeah. Senator Donovan, do you have any thoughts on the passage of these and what they might mean for the state? Any thoughts on these?
I mean, I think, yeah, thanks for that question. I think the Proposition 123 is going to have the most, perhaps kind of behind the scenes, inside the building, under the dome, whatever frame you want to have, challenges with that, because, you know, not news to this body that pays attention to Colorado politics, but with a finite funding source year after year because of the restrictions of Tabor, once you start really earmarking funds, it kind of has rolling impacts through the rest of the budget. So certainly a worthy goal line. I don't think there were too many members of the General Assembly, particularly the JBC, that were thrilled with the approach that 123 proposed, because it does handcuff us, and in lean years it becomes very difficult to fulfill some of these things that have clear earmarks. So I think I think it'll be interesting to see how 123 moves through. Of course, it does have provisions in it that the General Assembly can revisit that. I always think that's going to be very politically hard for them. So it was a great tip of the hat by the folks behind the initiative to say, oh, we can change these in hard years, but you're going to put politicians and public servants in a place of being perceived as voting against affordable housing if they ever try to change it. So this will be, another inventive way that the voters of Colorado have decided to take on a program, and then we'll see how the General Assembly can plan to implement it. The background of the Healthy School Meals for All was a bill that was carried by a lawmaker that when the fiscal note came attached to that bill, the bill quickly ended up being postponed and didn't pass into law. And then, it clearly became a thing that the only way you could secure that amount of funds was through a proposition. So I think seeing the success of these might be a new start of how lawmakers try to fund big ideas, just because our general operation budget can't always support big price tags, especially when they go, when they're an ongoing appropriation. Tabor just kind of restricts, some of those big ideas, big ticket items. So fascinating to see how the voters supported these, and how many of these the Colorado voters will continue to pass, that continue to ultimately, smidgen by smidgen, will increase that bottom line cost of living.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you for that insight. That's super. And I have a little asterisk by 123. Colorado CSI did make some recommendations around necessary changes that they saw in their analysis, and we'll touch on some of those things. But I would agree with you, Senator Donovan, the opportunity to actually open that up is rife with challenge. But we'll talk a little bit about that as we jump through. So next, additional past items, mushrooms and sale of beer. Probably pretty straightforward, Chris, if you want to touch on that a little bit.
These were not the issues that we particularly analyzed, and didn't come with large, fiscal notes or state budgetary impacts. I don't have much insight on Proposition 122, but I think one interesting thing is that the allowance for sale of beer in grocery stores passed. However, I think in your next slide, there were the two other related measures questioning whether or not we should be allowed to deliver alcohol, or whether or not we should sort of offer these an increasing number of licenses for sale of alcohol and liquor outside of grocery stores, and to help liquor stores, quote unquote, compete. Those both failed. So interesting, we saw tax increases, tax cuts, spending increases some measures around alcohol pass, others not. So whether that's split personality, or as I like to think, voters are really, I think, willing to examine each issue and have a preference or have some interest in having a say in each item individually, and are assessing those separately. So it's kind of interesting to see how it all played out, and there's not a clear, maybe clear narrative in my mind.
Yeah, indeed. Fantastic. Any comment here on these, Senator Donovan?
No, I would just Claire, and it gets, gosh, liquor initiatives and law get about as confusing as they get because we've been moving so many needles. But it was Proposition 125 was the addition of selling wine at grocery stores, which was, of course, the concern around it of would that impact, kind of the local smaller liquor stores that are such a good entry business point for so many folks. So I guess it's just one of those things where I hope concerns don't play out because certainly the more small businesses we can have in urban, suburban, and rural areas, the better. The small businesses are certainly the heartbeat of so many communities. So hopefully this doesn't have the impact that some people were afraid of.
That's great. Thank you for that. Let's see here, moving on. Again, made note that CSI had made some specific recommendations in their analysis for modifications to 123. We don't need to go into finer detail on these, and we'll share this presentation. And if you were partake in the October presentation, you have that analysis as well. But Chris, is there anything in particular that is of utmost importance for the legislature to address coming out of 123 passage?
Well, like you said, we could go into a lot of depth on this. And this work is led by our housing fellow, Peter Lafari, as well. I just want to mention there's some great work around other housing issues in this one in particular. But I think the main point out of this, I think, would be through both legislation and the regulatory process, this third bucket here, which is, resist temptation to the extent possible to mitigate some of the requirements or loosen any of the requirements of the measure, so that you stay more true to the value proposition in the terms of, can this meaningfully achieve some of the unit creation that is needed, both at very to address gaps at the very the lower side of the price point in the housing market, but also help some of the development cycle more broadly. So, I think that's the kind of one main call. It's more of a call for legislators and regulators in this audience, but I think that's something to sort of watch as it moves through the process.
That's great, thank you. And you might pop into the chat a link to your analysis on 123, just for folks to have access to that. I think that would be worthwhile. Well, with that, we move into a conversation around the candidate and the intrigue that was unfolding through the course of the political cycle and all of the anticipation around a red wave. I had indicated about in August, it seemed as if the red wave sort of was peaking, and certainly expectations were from our perspective, and I think we may have even touched on this in the October meeting, that there would likely be a narrowing of majorities at the legislature in both the House and the Senate, a potential pickup for the Republicans in the Senate, and I think there was general agreement that Governor Polis would continue on in his role, but it was unclear how some of the other statewide races would unfold. And as we all know, the outcome was very different than that. And we've seen an expansion of majorities, and certainly all the statewide offices went Democrat. Well, let's see here. As noted, there was a trifecta was expanded, was further established, reinforced with the outcome of at the legislative level and executive level. That trifecta has had an interesting impact and consequence to the business community. A lot of bills have passed over the last several years that business community has challenged. And we anticipate some additional conversations on policies that are important. But I would be curious, Senator Donovan's perspectives on the outcome of the election. We'll dive into some of the dynamics unfolding, but again, the executive level races were clear victories and significant victories for the Democrats in the state. There's questions about, has Colorado turned fully blue? I'd be curious your thoughts, Senator Donovan, around that, and just some general commentary about the election.
Yeah, general commentary is always fun, isn't it? But this was sure a fascinating election cycle for me to watch, a little bit from the sidelines and a little bit from being involved in, some other campaigns, but certainly not having my name on the ballot. I think an interesting place to start here is with that treasurer's race. Treasurer is often kind of used as just Democrat versus Republican, kind of just token race, because the treasurer isn't a political official that a lot of people know and often don't have, the name ID, the connection with them. So when you start to look at a treasurer's race and a gap of over 10%, we're starting to see some pretty interesting just Democrat versus Republican performance. These numbers were not anticipated on election night. Craig Hughes, I know, is on here, looks at numbers for a living. I look at them for a hobby. So I'm happy for Craig to text me or correct me later. But, certainly I think we were expecting, as Sandra, as you predicted, the governor to win. But the Attorney General, Treasurer, and Secretary of State, I don't think was anticipated that we'd win all three. I think most pundits were saying we'd get 2 out of 3, and one of them would drop off. And then the composition of the State House and State Senate, the strength of those numbers, I don't think anyone predicted on election night. In fact, there was real discussion along those of us who are a little bit fatalist and always think that we're losing an election until we win, is that, the Senate could possibly flip. But we indeed saw something very opposite. I'm of the camp that this was a historic election with turnout driven by women's choice as a real issue that was resonating with people, because we were just not capturing this type of turnout in any polls and any modeling and any numbers. So then you have to say, well, what is forcing people to maybe behave differently than we were predicting? Because we're pretty good at predicting voter behavior. And when something like that happens, there has to be something extra spicy in the mix. And I think that was women's choice. So that reflects the question, are we this bright blue? I don't think we're this bright blue of seeing that 10-point gap in treasurer, but I think we're pretty darn blue. Yeah. Which, is good and bad. Which is good and bad, of course, if you're a politico, because as a state in the middle of the country, that's not going to be a battleground anymore. You just kind of lose some of your ability to insert yourself in the national discussion. So we'll see how that plans out, in the years and really decades to come, and how Colorado kind of evolves with that. So what does it mean when you see a treasurer win by 10 points and 69 members of the General Assembly now being Democrats? I think one thing for the business community to be certainly very aware of is just what volume of legislation that translates to in a very just matter of fact way. I'm sure, as many of you know, every lawmaker gets 5 bills by rule that they get to introduce and bring to the floor. And most often, everyone in the majority carries more than 5 bills and gets to request additional late bills. So even if we start to think about, each one of those 69 members of the majority party getting 5 bills and maybe getting 5 bills extra, which would be less than I've ever run when I was in the majority, that's 10 bills a piece. We're looking at 690 bills in the system before we even really start to blink an eye. And 690 bills in the system is more than we've done in the floor in the past 4 years. So you can really start to see one, just the volume of attention to each of those bills, to those policies being well written, to them being thoughtful and being a great stakeholding process behind them. And then just getting them through two committee hearings, a committee hearing in each chamber at the minimum, 2 sessions on the floor. Those 120 days of session get pretty busy pretty quick. So, I think a great thing for the business community to ask of leadership in both the House and the Senate, well, how are you going to manage this volume? How are you going to give us the opportunity to have enough time with these bills to provide feedback, to see them? Because 690 is going to be the minimum. That's not our interim bills. That's not the extra special bill that I need as a favor. And it's not the Republican bills that will also be in the mix. And some of those will be bipartisan and certainly advance. On the executive side, the governor, interesting that most of his cabinet is staying the same. We've only seen one cabinet member change. So that consistency, I think, is good. You don't have to rebuild relationships. You don't have to think about how the personalities could change. But we did see a chief of staff change with the former speaker, Alec Garnett, moving into the chief position with working with Governor Polis. I think that will be fascinating because the additional changes that resulted in that. We saw Eve Lieberman, who came with Polis from DC, move over to OEDIT. I'm sure many of you haven't been able to cross paths with her because she is certainly a behind the scenes gal, but she'll be in a more forward role now. She is a smart cookie, has been with Jared for a very long time. And then, of course, into Eve Lieberman's role, we'll see David Oppenheim move in. So the team's getting back together. Alex and Dave, who worked together so long in the House, will now be working in the governor's office as kind of the main lens of that, the legislation. And then, I think another thing I wanted to mention, Sandra, which you and I haven't been able to chit chat too much over, but another thought problem that I'm having is, after 4 years of Democrats running bills, I'm getting seeing those passed in the law. We are starting to see some of those bills now enter into the court system with either challenges or concerns. So, right, you kind of have that delayed effect of how a law passes through the different branches of government. So one example I can think of is the Farm Worker Bill of Rights that was passed a number of years ago, now has a challenge to it in the court system. So, as you see that trifecta happen, you got to keep your hands in a lot of different pots. And I think as the business community, it really will be managing the volume and managing this word that's being thrown around a lot of mandate, right? They're walking into office with a mandate, and how do they use that power? Power is good and bad, and how is that power executed over the years to come, in all 3 branches of government?
Yeah, great insight, fantastic insight. I appreciate that very much. And along those lines, you noted, and just for everyone's context, as Carrie was sharing some of those very important insights, it is a near super on the Senate side and on the House side. You have the Senate a near supermajority with 23 Democrats who now sit in majority versus the 20 that were in the last General Assembly the last couple of years. And so a significant differential. And that adds to the conversation on how the committee assignments will unfold as well, and what how the majority on committees looks. And it's consequential to your ability to pass or kill measures, amendments, and the like. So it's a factor as we as lobbyists consider, and the legislators themselves, as they look at how they move their legislation through. Senate President Steve Fenberg will continue in his role, and Minority Leader Paul Lundin was elected Senate Minority Leader, and he is a very reasoned voice. And Senator Fenberg has very open door policy to conversations. But one of the challenges, and this extends both in the House and the Senate, but perhaps more so in the House, is the conversations that occur within the caucus themselves. On the House side, you have 46 Democrats who make up the majority, 19 Republicans. That is a supermajority. And it is anticipated there will be a considerable amount of debate internal to the caucus, a significant difference on the political spectrum within the Democrat caucus. And that will, I think, present a significant challenge for the speaker, who is Julie McCluskey, coming out of Summit, who actually, there was overlap in your districts, yes, Senator Donovan, with Julie McCluskey, who is viewed as a moderate, and but she will have a significant job on her hand to navigate through her caucus dynamics. And as Senator Donovan pointed out, the sheer volume of legislation could be impactful, and we fully anticipate the introduction of a considerable amount of bills that she will as speaker. She has little control over what's introduced, but she has a significant role in how that plays out, the committee assignments and the like. So that is one of the dynamics that will have to be fully factored as we move through this next legislative session. Mike Lynch is the new House Minority Leader, overseeing 19 Republicans. I think it's the smallest minority caucus that we've seen in. I'm not sure that we've seen that in my time lobbying. Anyway, a very long time. So those dynamics are really important considerations as we look to the legislation that may be introduced and what the outcome might be. I often reflect on Speaker Romanoff's comments to me during his last, when he first became Speaker, and it was one of the first trifecta environments in which we saw when he was with, when Governor Ritter was governor, and he noted to me, don't judge us by what's introduced, judge us by what is passed. And it's a really important distinction, but it will require a significant amount of work from the business community in engaging this legislative session. And that transitions us to that very conversation about what does this really mean in terms of the issues that we'll be contending with. And we'll keep this high level, but just to touch on a few of the things we might see in the upcoming General Assembly. Workplace regulations, we fully anticipate seeing a number of things that were defeated in either last session or the session prior re-emerging, given the amount of Democrat votes that could be cobbled together to pass these things. And so Employee Trip Reduction Program, Cobert was a vocal participant in the regulatory process on E-Trip, and we anticipate a reintroduction of the legislation that the business community was successful in defeating last legislation. Power Act, which pertains to harassment and discrimination and expansion of worker rights in that respect, also defeated over the last couple of years, and do anticipate that coming back. Workers' comp, gig worker classification, marijuana, employee off-duty use will be a big one. There have been multiple attempts to engage in that dialogue, and so that will be back on the table. And you can sort of see as we roll down, climate change policies have been a theme since the trifecta came into place in 2018, and fully anticipate a continuation of that dialogue, although Senator Fenberg has indicated that he wants to now provide a little bit more time for that which they've accomplished to continue to unfold and evolve, and perhaps revisit. But I would not be the least bit surprised if we saw some additional pieces of legislation introduced in this category. Environmental justice will be a significant topic. There was a task force that was forged last session, and the recommendations from that task force were just released and will be a point of conversation this session, and perhaps one of the more difficult conversations for the business community and industry sector as it relates to our engagement with disadvantaged communities and from an environmental justice perspective. And then energy will be another area where additional expansion of the regulatory environment on oil and natural gas, particularly, and pressures there. Carrie, any thoughts on any of these and what you're in, how you see this unfolding? And I know we're.
Yeah, I mean, we look at any of these, and each of them could be, a session worth of work. And I think, unfortunately, this is, or perhaps fortunately, I shouldn't assume as much, but right, this could just be the tip of the iceberg. What I will say is, what I have seen be impactful in some of these bills that kind of gain a momentum to pass is really getting that local business voice into the lawmakers' ear. It's the first one on the list, so I'll just take that employee trip reduction program. What does that look like to to the single mom who now has to drive her car to a place to pick up a van, to then go to work, to then take the van back? She can't buy groceries anymore. How does she grab her kid from school to get her to the soccer game, right? I mean, you just have to pick. The words on paper can look real sexy, real progressive, real meaningful. Exactly why you ran for office is to make this type of change. And unless the business community can come forward and say, hey friend, this is what your bill will actually mean to your neighbor that lives 4 doors down, I think will be the hard and important work that you guys will have to do. Also, and Sandra, you are so good at navigating the Capitol on this. How do you not oppose a bill and just try to work on a change? Because the moment you come out and just say your bill stinks, there's not too many representatives or senators who wants to take a meeting with someone who says their bill stinks. So, how do you make that employee trip reduction program apply to companies that have 500 people instead of 100? How do you start to move those details internally in the law? Because finding the no votes to defeat a bill in committee or defeat a bill on the floor is going to be harder and harder.
Yeah, indeed. Great insight. Just quickly, I'll touch on, there's affordable housing will be a big issue, water, land use, consumer protection. Those are all things we are anticipating this session to be oriented around. So I know we've got limited time here. That was, I think, my last slide. Debbie, I will throw it to you and we can sort of go from there. I appreciate the insights of Senator Donovan and Chris on this session and the outcome of the election so much, and look forward to continue to work with you all.
Great, thank you, Sandra. I know that there's a lot to cover. I want to give Chris
So
Brown
much to
one
talk
more.
about.
I know. I want to give Chris Brown one more chance to weigh in. I don't think Chris had a chance to sort of look at a look ahead, anticipated issues. And then we had a couple questions come through Q&A. We might have time for one of them to weave in there. In fact, Chris, that might be a really good one for you as an economist. If you see the one around, a question coming from the private sector, the simple fact that when you have new laws that require that reduce revenue, at the same time laws that require new budget line items, I'm not a math major, but the math doesn't work sometimes. So that's one of the questions perhaps as an economist you could handle, and looking ahead at what you see for 2023.
Sure, I'll try to be brief. I guess I would my read on the session, we have our own sort of research priorities. One thing I might just plug here is we're launching and releasing our second annual free enterprise report next week. We have a summit next Tuesday, and the report summarizes both our work and our outlook for different policy areas and tracks some recent legislation impacting these areas. And so that kind of gives you, I think, hopefully a good scan of a lot of these key issues and what the outlook might be. But it's interesting. Listen, hearing Senator Donovan, I think where I feel is that in years past, we've had a somewhat of a sense of the big policy issues. They've been debated for a couple of years. Again, credit to Senator Donovan and a couple of years of work on a healthcare bill that we sort of knew was coming. Maybe I'm outside, but I don't see a lot of the same major issues that have been percolating that we can anticipate in the same way we have in years past. So I think there will be a lot coming quickly, and it is important to be engaged. It is important to be part of these conversations and be aware of what big in the pipeline is coming. I'm not sure, to your specific question, Debbie, and a specific question from the audience, I'm not sure if this is a question of, for a company, there's new legislation impacting costs to business and the revenues, and if that's not workable, or if it's more related to the state budget and there's both a reduction in revenue and an increased expectation on expenses, maybe they both apply. But I think it's a challenge and a reality for both private sector, public sector. I guess another thing I'll flag in this vein is that paid family leave, that fee starts January 1st and is another issue that employers and employees will be grappling with. Our bottom line is we can look at state policy, but I think there's also some broader national context, international context, potential high probability for an economic slowdown that will have further revenue, further budgetary implications that again, when you sort of try to square that with a huge docket of legislative priorities, can create uncertainty, can create further complications for the private sector to be interested in investing, making Colorado a priority. So I think there's a lot to juggle there, and we'll see what those details end up being and where the big policy changes are in the coming weeks, month or so.
Perfect. Thanks for that, Chris. And I just want to thank Sandra and Chris for being regulars for Colorado Business Roundtable, and now welcoming Senator Donovan for your incredible insight as well as we look towards 2023, not only state issues, we from time to time have briefings on federal issues as well from one of our large employers. So thank you all for joining us. And Chris, also, I'm glad you gave that plug for that launch date next Tuesday, as Covert is a sponsor of that Free Enterprise Report, the rankings book that helps look at how we compete with other states in terms of economic opportunity. So thanks all of you for joining us.